So now we have a definition that identifies that to be moral, we are going to have to engage in a method, and I talked about this a little bit already. This method is going to be based in evidence. Just belaboring some of this. To help us conceptualize this a little better, let's consider this moral continuum that you see here. On the left, we have suffering. On the right, we have flourishing. And in the middle, there's you, right? Or humanity, or Homo sapiens, or your mother, or your kids, or whatever, whoever, right? And at its most basic, morality does relate to the individual, but whole groups of people, because we're all the same thing, can be put into that place. I just put you in there because people think about themselves a lot. So you could put yourself right there. It's easier than if I put your mom, right? Or whatever. No matter who we put in this place, the goal is always the same. To move Homo sapiens away from suffering and towards flourishing through our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And I already sort of asked, but I was fielding other questions. Is everybody comfortable with this definition? Does this sound like morality to people? Yes.
I think you're restrictive on morality, because what if we met aliens, or whether it's okay to torture animals, or whatever.
No, that's a very good point.
I don't like restricting it.
No, and I restrict it only for the purpose of the book, only for the scope that I'm now appealing to Homo sapiens. After we figure out how to treat each other, and how to implement moral systems, and how to have a science of morality, I would love to open it up to chimps and the great apes in general, and probably orca, and anything else that we feel like we want to. I mean, you're allowed to. There's nothing in here that says you can't apply your moral ethic that you learned from science to a mouse or whatever you want. Something that has an experience, something that's alive, or something that suffers or flourishes. There's no reason why you wouldn't do that.
But you're defining morality as Homo sapiens.
I'm going to focus on Homo sapiens.
But that's not a whole definition of morality. That's a limited definition.
Yes, but I'm limiting it on purpose. Just to be clear, I'm limiting it on purpose because I want to deal with that first. Like, I don't want to sit in a room, no offense, I don't want to sit in a room and talk about mice or whales or whatever. Let's figure out the human part first, and then let's start adding things in. That'll be another book. This is this book. This book is the human book, and then the other book is, okay, now what do we do with whales or whatever, right? That's just for the book. But I understand your point, and I don't think it has to be. I think the definition, once understood and once the science is developed, opens up to anything that suffers and flourishes, including aliens, assuming that they suffer and flourish for the same reasons. Yes, sir.
I think empathy is an important part of all this.
It certainly is, yes, sir.
Yeah, but you just talk about thoughts. I think empathy is a thought.
Sure it is, but that covers it then, doesn't it? Thoughts, feelings. We will talk about
thoughts too. So.
Oh, certainly that, yes. And you can empathize with bad people, which is a lot of what happens. But we are going to actually specifically address empathy. It's going to be a little bit covert, but when we talk about how to collect subjective evidence in a scientific way, we'll be talking about empathy.
So are you using suffering and flourishing as endpoints or standards that are a priority, good or bad?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think you could say that, sure.
I was just looking at it, and in my mind I'm going, flourishing or suffering are not necessarily good or bad themselves. Flourishing humans, overpopulation. Suffering humans.
But flourishing doesn't mean populating. It's not necessarily what that means. And science doesn't mean, when we go into the science, it doesn't necessarily, the outcome of our scientific investigation isn't going to be the more people that there are, the more flourishing there is. That's not necessarily the case. We don't know what the answers are yet. This is just a framework for how to collect the information so that we can come to moral conclusions.
You have to restrict those terms as well.
Probably. There's a lot of work to be done, for sure. Are we ready to?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what are some benefits of this definition? Well, and this isn't a benefit for you necessarily, but it could be opened up. I just want to make that clear. I do take your point, and I agree with you. But just for the focus of the book and for this presentation, it is focused on Homo sapiens. It's not vague in the way that those other definitions were vague, in the way that our Constitution is vague, for instance. It relies on evidence. That's huge. It's scientific in nature and copies the scientific method. And it's flexible enough to include all of humanity. We're not going to be 3/5ing anybody out of this. We wouldn't have any cause or reason to do that. We wouldn't have any evidence to demonstrate that we should do that. So now that we've discussed evidence, I want to talk a little bit about the two different kinds of evidence that we're going to collect and how we can do all this. So there's evidence of the hard sciences, right? And evidence like physiological science that tells us about the human body, neurology tells us about our brain and so on. There's hard science evidence that we can draw from. There's brain imaging and so on. But we're all human beings. We're all Homo sapiens. So we have the unique ability to vocalize how we feel. And that is, by definition, a subjective data point. Your account of your suffering or flourishing is subjective. And we should collect that from people as part of this process. And in that way, we can align our moral thoughts, beliefs, and actions with both objective moral evidence, like the facts of neurology or physiology or biology. But we can also include something like subjective moral evidence, like your experience of flourishing, to have a real full picture, morally speaking, of what it is that we should do and why. And we're gonna get to a real specific example. So I'm just like, how do we get there? We'll get there. And the outcome would be that because we're using evidence, we achieve intellectual integrity, meaning that our beliefs align with evidence. We don't have any beliefs that don't align with evidence. And we engage with this morality just like we do science and discover moral truths. So this has some real benefit to it. We could actually get somewhere with this. So what does some of this evidence look like? So this is Pew data. Now, this is just a visual representation of what a moral data set might look like. I want to be very clear here that the question they're asking, do you think abortion should be legal in all cases, legal in most cases, illegal in most cases, or illegal in all cases? That is a moral question, but it's not being asked in the correct way. And I'll explain that in just a moment. There's a lot of noise in this data, and I want to point that out. But this is what a moral data set might look like. And I know you guys know what data looks like. But I wanted to show you this. The answer to these questions are surprisingly simple if we use the methodology that I outline in this book. And we're just going to focus on the evidence and the science. I call these human data sets in the book. They could be called moral data sets or whatever, but I call them human data sets. And this is Pew's attempt to collect such data. And you've seen data like this before. But as I mentioned, this data isn't sound. I'll explain why shortly. But if you look at this data, this is what different countries think about the legality of abortion. But this doesn't tell us how we should think. This doesn't give us any information about what our conclusion about abortion should be. This doesn't help us come to a conclusion about abortion. This just tells us how either moral or immoral these countries are, right? We have a country like, I don't know which one is immoral. There's one that says 58 illegal in all cases. That's Indonesia. That sounds like me saying Indonesia is immoral in the case of abortion because 58, I guess, percentage of them think it should be illegal in all cases. But it doesn't tell me what I should think. And it doesn't tell me how to get to what I should think. So this data, while it does help you if you're a person who happens to be able to get pregnant and you might not want to carry it to term, this might help you figure out where you want to live, right? But it doesn't tell you, should you get an abortion? It doesn't tell you, is abortion moral or immoral? Is this decision appropriate or not, right? It doesn't tell you any of that. And this is largely the kind of moral data we're collecting. It's just filled with noise. It does have a purpose, don't get me wrong, but this is subjective moral data that's collected, and it's got a lot of bias and bigotry, and it's got a lot of false belief, and it's baked into it because of the way they ask the question. We'll talk about the right question in a minute.